Hey everybody, hope you guys are doing good today. Really excited about what we got coming up this week here on the channel. As promised, I'm going to be talking all week long about lure categories, all the different categories of lures that you can catch bass on. I'm going to try to break as many of them as I can down. Probably, it may even take longer than a week, but it's going to be a lot of information here. I'm going to go through each category and sort of give you some tips and advice on when and where to fish it. Just some details surrounding the techniques that we're going to be talking about. And I think it's going to be, pretty educational regardless of, the skill level that you have. I mean, a lot of the things that we're going to talk about here are baits that I fished for over 40 years. I've got a lot of experience using them, and hopefully it can help you guys catch a few more fish out. But hey, before we get started, a couple different things here. In the description of this video, I'm going to include a link to the Fish the Moment tackle warehouse link. And if you guys are interested, like all this week, in ordering any of these baits that I'm talking about, we'd really appreciate it if you could use that link into Tackle Warehouse. Fish the Moment gets a small percentage of the proceeds of the sale, and it really helps out Johnny and I a lot in putting out these videos that we're doing right now. So that'd be really cool if you could do that. Much appreciated. And so let's get into it here. Today's topic, what I want to talk about is really the oversized jerkbaits. And as everybody knows, I do a lot of information on jerkbaits, and we're going to cover them, in all the stuff we're going to do this week. It's just going to be a small part of it. But one of the categories I wanted to talk about today are these oversized jerkbaits, because you don't hear that much about them really. Most of the jerkbaits fishing that you hear and you talk about are just the traditional, Megabass Vision 110 jerkbait. That's what the majority of the people throw all the time when they're fishing jerkbaits, or a similar jerkbait in that 4 3/4 size. So the baits that we're talking about today are all over 5 inches long, over 6, and one of them's over 6 inches long, and there's specific situations where these particular baits work really good. And I started out fishing, the oversized jerkbaits years ago, back when they made, they still do. I was fishing the Magnum Rogue a lot. That's a large bait. It's a lot bigger than the traditional size Rogue, and there's certain situations where that works good. So I sort of want to show you the three that we're going to talk about. The three baits that I'm going to talk about today are the Megabass IDO Shiner, which is this one right here, the Megabass 110 LBO, which is this one here, and the Megabass Kanata, which is really the giant jerkbait we're going to talk about here. These three specific models. First thing we're going to talk about here is when you want to throw an oversized jerkbait. Several different conditions for that. A lot of times they won't bite this jerkbait simply because of the mood, the personality of the bass in, the type of water, the size of the fish, the species, a lot of different things. But for the most part, there's two times that I fish the oversized jerkbait. Number one is when the bass are really aggressive. Times when you've got situations that lend itself to aggressive fish. That would be super windy days, cloudy days that are unseasonably warm if you have cool water. Some of these things that activate the bigger fish overall on the lake, not just with the jerkbaits, but fishing in just general is usually better. Those are the time right off the bat that they work good. The second time they work good is in the late winter and in the pre-spawn that we're getting ready to come up on here over the next month or so. Because what happens in many of the lakes across the country, the forage base, whether it be the threadfin shad, the gizzard shad, perch, whatever, during the pre-spawn, this is the period of the year where that forage and the prey for the bass is at its largest size. They haven't spawned since the summer. They're getting ready to spawn like in May. And the maturity and the overall size of the bait fish is larger. So that's why these oversized jerkbaits work really good. The first one we'll talk about is the IDO Shiner. This bait is like, 5 and a little over 5 inches long. It's a little bit wider and across the back and on the side than the traditional jerkbait. And this is what I would consider on the small side of an oversized jerkbaits. The IDO Shiner is a bait that'll get down on 8-pound test line, this bait will get down 6 or 7 feet on a long cast. It's got a pretty aggressive action on it, and that's what's the difference. A lot of jerk baits you throw, even like the 110, has a little bit more sluggish action as compared to like the IDO Shiner. And the IDO Shiner is a bait that I want to throw when those fish are super aggressive. You know, it's a good pre-spawn bait too, but it's a little bit, even though it's an oversized bait, it's got a little bit of a subtle aspect compared to some of these other ones we're going to talk about. But the ideal situation for the IDO Shiner for me is when you have water temperatures that are like, say in the low to mid 50s, you have like a 10 to 20 mile an hour south wind, you got water visibilities that are in that sort of that 2.5 to 4 foot range, and you have a good, a fairly decent largemouth population in the lake. I mean, this isn't a bait that you'll catch a lot of fish on as far as the smallmouth or the spotted bass, unless you fish up north, which we'll talk about here a little bit later. But predominantly, you know, this bait is like good. It's this bait that's like, it would be really good over like submerged grass, like some of the TVA lakes, Lake Gunnersville, Lake Chickamauga, some of the places that got submerged grass, Toledo Bend, Sam Rayburn, Lake Seminole, those type of places. Pre-spawn situation in a lake that you have a lot of grass, this IDO Shiner is just one of my top choices. Second one is a fairly new bait Megabass comes out with. This is the 110 LBO. This bait's over 5 inches long again. You can sort of see it compared to the IDO Shiner. It's even a little bit larger than the IDO Shiner. And again, one of the best things about the 110 LBO is in the past, a lot of the jerk baits that you fish, like the you know, the big rogues, that type of stuff, they tend to have a little bit more sluggish action the bigger that they go. And the great thing about the 110 LBO, it's got a really hard, aggressive darting action on it, and that is sort of sets it apart a little bit from those big jerk baits. Also, you can see how thin the back is. This particular bait is it's almost sort of like a flat side jerk bait a little bit. It doesn't have really rounded sides to it. Look at the difference here between you see just a little bit of difference between the IDO Shiner and the 110 LBO. And this creates a different profile in the water. You know, it puts off a little bit bigger silhouette with the large side on it. And the overall size of the bait will generate bigger fish. This particular bait, you're gonna, like I use it most of the time on 6 to 8 pound test line in the pre-spawn. It again is on a long cast with 6 to 8 pound test line. It's gonna get down into that 7 to 8 foot range. And this is very similar to the IDO Shiner as far as the personality and the mood that the bass will hit it on, except that for whatever reason, the 110 LBO, this works really good if you're fishing like some of the highland reservoirs in the pre-spawn that have a lot of steep banks, like steep bluffs, channel swing points, a lot of vertical structure. So this bait for me, one of the key areas that I fish it in is I'll get on the main lake channel banks when that water temperature first starts to hit like 50 degrees. Actually, when it gets up towards 55 is a little bit better. I'll get the boat tied into those steep banks and bluffs, and I'll make super long casts parallel to those steep banks. I try to keep my boat like in 10 to 20 foot of water, and I'm trying to get this bait down close to 10 foot as I can off those bluff banks. And also, if you have a lake that has like a lot of submerged, old broken off submerged timber, you know, places, you know, that have a lot of timber on it, throwing it out over that deeper timber, those fish will come up on it during the pre-spawn. Some of the biggest bass that I catch on a pre-spawn jerkbait bite in the year come off those steep banks that have submerged timber that comes like maybe within 10 to 15 feet of the surface. You don't get many bites in that situation, but you can catch a lot of big ones. So if you fish a lake, any lake out there that has rocky bluffs and water visibility of over 3 feet, this is the jerkbait that I like to use with it. Another one, and we'll talk a little bit on the next one, but this bait is also killer on big smallmouth. If you fish like up north in some of the natural bodies of water, the Great Lakes, all those northern tier smallmouth lakes, you get any type of condition where that water temperature is over 60 degrees throughout the summer. This is just a killer for that. It'll really bring those big fish up. And one of the things I like to do with when I'm back to smallmouth, we'll talk a little bit more, is you're working these baits a lot faster for smallmouth. If you're fishing smallmouth in anywhere between June to October, I'm fishing these baits super hard. I'm keeping them close to the surface. You want those fish to come up on these baits. You don't want them to get a good look at it in that clear water areas that have the smallmouth on it. We'll talk a little bit more on this last one. So the last bait we're talking about is the biggest one Megabass makes. It's the Megabass Kanata. This bait is 6 1/3 inches long. It weighs 1 ounce. Here's the 110 LBO, which is a big bait, and you can see how much bigger the Kanata is. The Kanata is truly probably one of the largest jerk baits that you have on the market. And not a lot of people have fished this thing, but I'm telling you right now, when you put this Kanata, this oversized jerk bait in the water, and you see it work, it looks incredible. This thing has got the most lifelike, hard darting action of any jerk bait that I've ever used in my life. It comes alive. It's got a super wide side-to-side jerk. It's an aggressive bait. It's designed to catch aggressive fish. And this bait is not, I don't really consider it a true suspending jerk bait, because its range is like 4 to 5 foot at the maximum. So you're not going to be able to pull up a lot of fish out of super deep water with it. But in the late pre-spawn, when that water temperature starts to get in the mid 50s, even the upper 50s, and those fish start to move closer into the bank, again, highland reservoirs, rocky reservoirs, or if you have a lot of that grass, say some of the grass flats on Lake Gunnersville that come up like 3 to 4 foot from the surface, when that water temperature hits in the mid 50s, there's not another jerkbait out there that is as good as the Kanata to catch big bass in the pre-spawn. I have wrecked some big ones under those conditions, since this bait came out, a year or two ago. So that's what I'm looking for, in the traditional reservoirs, that combination of mid 50s degree water temperature, and I'm looking for those bass that are positioned in that 3 to 6 foot of water to be caught on this thing. Again, with these aggressive jerk baits, you need the right conditions. You don't want conditions that are bright and sunny. You don't want conditions that don't have much wind or after a cold front. You need the situations where you have warm temperatures, water still cool, high winds, clouds is even better. Things that make these fish want an aggressive bait is better. But the place where this big Kanata really shines at is like we were talking a little bit before, is on for big smallmouth. All of the northern tier lakes, Champlain, Lake St. Clair, Lake Erie, Saginaw Bay, Michigan, all those northern tier smallmouth lakes, this is a big secret bait for up there. Those guys are catching giant smallmouth on these things. They're throwing them out there, working the bait super hard, keeping their rod tip high, just jerking the heck out of it. And the Kanata is, everybody knows when I talk about fishing jerk baits, I fish them on spinning rods 95% of the time. The Kanata is one bait that I will fish on a bait caster, because it's a full 1 ounce bait. It'll cast a mile on a bait caster. And when I'm fishing the Kanata, I'm not interested in getting that bait deep. Most of the time when I'm fishing this bait, I'm either fishing for those shallower pre-spawn fish, or I'm fishing for the smallmouth that you want to get the fish to come up on it. Now, quickly here, I want to go over the smallmouth deal on these oversized jerk baits, because a lot of people have a misconception. When you're fishing northern smallmouth on jerk baits, it is very important not to let the fish get a good look at the bait. So you don't want to use that traditional side, coming from the side or down, jerk pause. You want to jerk it up in the air like that. And so I'm actually taking my rod tip and I'm jerking it like that, almost like a 2 o'clock position, and it will keep this bait up in that 1 to 2 to 3 foot water column. So these smallmouth, if you're fishing those flats for smallmouth, like in 5 to 10 foot of water, the bait is always above their head, and you will find that you'll catch a lot more and a lot bigger smallmouth if you keep that bait high in the water column. So on the big jerk baits, whether it's using the 110 LBO or the IDO Shiner or the Kanata, I'm using I'm using, again, a bait casting rod. I like to go to a little bit stiffer rod. I use a Megabass Diablo Orochi, which is a fairly stiff tip for a jerkbait. But when you're fishing like northern smallmouth and you want a hard darting action, you need a little bit stiffer tip to get that bait to have a crisp snap on it. So this is one situation where I will use a little bit stiffer rod. Coupling up that, most of the time I'm using 12 to 15 pound test Seaguar and Vizex line on these big jerk baits when I want to keep them up, and that's for the smallmouth. Now, if I'm fishing in the highland lakes, really highland lakes or grass, it doesn't matter if I'm fishing, Lake Cumberland or Kentucky Lake or Rayburn or something like that, and it's a pre-spawn situation, whether I'm fishing grass or rocks both. All three of these baits, again, I'm using a little bit heavier test line. I'm using most of the time I'm using like 10 to 15 pound test line. I do use the 110 LDO and the IDO Shiner, again, on spinning rods, but I'll put these baits like on 10 pound test Seaguar and Vizex, and then upgrade to like the 10 to 15 pound test on the Kanata. But anyway, those are the main situations for it. If you're sort of in limbo a little bit about when to throw different size profile jerk baits, this is a good foundation for you to begin with on the oversized jerk baits. Just to reiterate, best time to use oversized jerk baits is during the pre-spawn, when water temperatures are in the low to mid 50s and the conditions are really conducive to making the fish aggressive, and they're really, really good for northern smallmouth lakes that have predominant smallmouth. Those are the two main situations where I use the big jerk baits, and really I don't really use them any other time. Those are the two specific situations when I use them. The rest of the time I'm going to be using a different jerk bait profile that we'll talk about later in the week a little bit. So anyway, that's the first lure category, oversized jerk baits. Hope that helped you out any more. If you got any questions on it, feel free to drop a comment on this video, and I'll do everything I can to answer the comments on it. And again, please, if you get a chance and want to order some baits this week, click that Fish the Moment YouTube link into Tackle Warehouse, and that'll really help out Johnny and I a lot. Appreciate that. So thanks for tuning in. I hope you guys liked the video. Hit the like button if you like it. Subscribe if you haven't. And we'll be back tomorrow with our second lure category. So stay tuned. See you.